I'm going to try and make this snappy, but I always say that. But I'm going to try and streamline some of the things I want to talk to you about just through something practical, which is going through the example folder, which I don't know if all of you have visited this one. So I said that I was going to give you feedback on paper number 2, which might have seemed like a really long time ago, but I want to give you feedback before you get the next paper underway. And so the assignment that for last paper number 2 was a combination of 2 papers I smushed together. And I think that maybe for some of you who kind of try to talk about everything, it made your source use a little thin. So I think that was my fault. However, if you go back and choose one of these papers to revise, you might need to put that backbone back into the paper with the source, and then also using the primary and secondary sources. Also, I think the connection between John Price and Josephine Goman might have been a bridge too far with the sources that we had, since John Price's behavior really could be contextualized with the sources, where Josephine Goman, I think, as more of an outlier, was a little bit harder to put in context, especially since maybe she was off Borden's radar. I think it was ironic that she actually had some freedom staying up all night at her job when her cohorts were also privy to the locus parentis, right? They were overly supervised. So she was kind of in a class by herself. But I think you came up with some creative ideas to make the connection. I think someone had said both Goman and Price valued extracurricular activities. So Josephine Goman and John Price, if they met in a dark alley, maybe they go and, I don't know, go to a movie or something. So they both had those similar interests in making the most of college, although Price obviously had more resources and he was a second generation college student, and Josephine Goman was a first generation college student. And then anytime I take something out of the syllabus, it seems to be missing. And what we had read before with this unit is the scrapbook of Frankie Pratt. It's fiction, but the author used artifacts from real college students. Frankie Pratt was a first generation college student. She struggled. She had a scholarship. Her mom didn't have any money. Her father had died, but she still had some fun. Of course, she was a victim of sexism, and there was even some kind of, not really sexual assault, but some dicey things that happened to her, even in this scrapbook. But I didn't assign it because I didn't want to give you another expensive book. But now I realize that we maybe could have used it to think through this culture and this time. I'm still looking for something like Frankie Pratt that maybe isn't fiction. So I am going to just remind you about your resources in the example folder. So the examples for this paper, we have somebody who's taking the approach of using Thielen and Foss and the history of college and the development of college from 1900 to 1920 to the 1930s to consider John Price's behavior. One thing I'm emphasizing in my feedback to you is thinking about ways to use the sources to describe what happened to people rather than just the fact that they wrote something. It can make it a little bit smoother. It can bring things to life a little bit more. I'm going to show you how someone did that with a newspaper article in a minute. So this interplay that I keep kind of emphasizing between the primary and secondary sources, if you're in a pinch, I would go secondary, most important, primary, secondly important, because if you haven't done your secondary source backup, looks like you're speculating to the reader. So you need to back up your claims with some secondary sources. Primary sources can really spice your paper up and do that showing that I'm trying to emphasize, that you're not just telling about what happened. Again, just a good example. Describes the report card a little bit, but then also what describes happened to Price. He even earned an A. So we can take what people said about what happened to them and then assume it did happen to them. We can be maybe overly skeptical about what people say happened to them. We can, and then I also want to just draw your attention to the examples for the creative option A couple people attempted it, which I love the creative option. So if you think about it this way, the scrapbook of Franny Pratt that I did not assign was kind of an example of that creative option where you can bring someone's world to life or something missing to life by something creative. Also, Iron Jaw Angels, you could probably argue, is a creative option, showing what it was like at the time, making things up, of course, maybe not 100% showing what happened, but using sources to do so. But what was missing for, I would say, pretty much everybody who did the creative example is using a substantive rationale. And the rationale has to be kind of like a mini paper. It still has to do the same work of any paper. It's got to have primary source and secondary source material. And then also it has to argue what the creative piece or artifact is showing. So this writer made an in and out slip for a woman who was subject to this loco parentis, the double standard that women had less freedom than men on college campuses, and he wrote about that using Bourdain, and then also some of the things that the women in the alumni survey said. Okay. So again, and then I'm also just drawing attention to when you're using the sources, again, those alumni sources, is that you're not just saying so-and-so said something, but they're also describing what happened to them, all right? And in another example for this paper, let's see, was it a 2.21? This is a little bit more, this is the one about the women. This was focused on the women. This writer does a good job of, when quoting Julia Knight, a former University of Michigan student, she takes what happened to this woman, Julia Knight, and just says this happened to her, and this is what a professor said to her. So using the sources to retell what happened in the past, not just like, blah, someone said it, plop it in there. Okay. So if you don't attempt to use these sources and use the direct evidence, I can't really tell if you can do it, and then I can't help you do it better. So that is why I'm really encouraging you to challenge yourself. Don't be afraid to try it. All these papers are practice, but definitely required, as far as I'm concerned, for every paper. All right, so I just want to draw your attention to a final example that I think will be helpful to you. Both examples for the next paper are pretty good, but this is a paper example I just added. And this writer did a good job of using the newspapers in the way that I'm talking about, where you're not just saying, the New York Times wrote about this, but using the papers to find out what happened and what people were saying. So I'm just going to cruise through and try and find a couple of examples of that. So the writer found an article quoting Alice's sister, Helen, and Helen said something about what was happening to Alice Paul in jail, and then just quoted the article. So we can assume that if something happened and it was covered in the paper, that did happen. It depends on the thing, right? We can have some healthy skepticism. And so that was a good find, I would say, that this writer found an article quoting Alice Paul's sister. So that's kind of the idea of the assignment, is to embellish the sources that exist. Some people kind of go off their own way and have an angle completely different than my prompt. As long as you find a way to integrate the secondary sources, the primary sources, you have creative license. I'm trying to find another example. Okay, so again, the author of this paper uses the newspaper to find out what happened, okay, and describes what happened to them. If you notice, also using the article title in the internal citation, these older newspapers didn't have bylines, so you don't know the author of the article, so it's kind of clunky, but you can put in the title of the article to cite them and then the works cited. So the works cited of this writer, I admit, was kind of a little bit lazy, but it was practical, right? He explained which assigned source that he used, and then also the source that he got from the database. So if I was going to rewrite this paper as a better example, I might have gone through the process of making a better works cited, but I'm not going to be 100% picky as long as I've got it figured out. But the most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is the synthesis and the rhetorical moves to make things smooth when you're quoting other people and not just plopping direct evidence in there. So good luck, everybody. Be in touch through email or through office hours. Make an appointment if my office hours aren't convenient. And it might not seem like it, but we're really, I think, over the hump. I think October was a long month. We usually have a break in October. I don't know why they got rid of it. It was a bad timing to march us through October when we're so busy taking classes online and so worried what's going on out there in the world. But, I just work here. And, I think that we have a little bit of a break in November to catch up. And if you're a little behind, I would say just kind of keep on task going forward, circle back and catch up when you can, be in touch with me about a plan. And in the meantime, be well, and hopefully I will see you or hear from you soon.